Hello, everyone. It's so wonderful to see you all filling the auditorium today. My name is Julie Kim, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm the chair of the School of Architecture. And I'm so pleased to welcome Thomas Phifer, the 2025 Portman Critic. Those are my keys. 2025 Portman Critic to Georgia Tech. We're really happy to have Tom here with us. Before I introduce Tom, though, I want to share a little bit of history around the Portman Studio. Um, since 2000, the Portman Studio has allowed us to bring the most incredible thought leaders and those who are really pushing the limits of our discipline to come and work with our students here in the Master of Architecture program here in the school. This gift is it's a generous gift, and it expands our reach beyond just here in Atlanta. I recall it was probably 4 years ago, I think it was. I was on a program review visit at Arkansas, the University of Arkansas, and I was walking through the gallery and I saw our 2019 Portman book, a publication there in the gallery that was part of an exhibit that was around the advancements in timber. So our broad is very rich, and the work that the students engage in the studio is impactful. The Portman entities also all continue to make tremendous impact around the world, and we're really proud to have this connection with the Portman family and the Portman Foundation. I want to expressly recognize and thank Jana Portman Simmons, whose generosity and her enduring support and commitment allows us to bring in such influential practitioners such as Thomas Phifer this spring. It really is our way of being able to advance design discourse through what is our signature. Well, it's really our flagship design studio in the professional degree program. So thank you to the Portman family. So Tom Phifer. I was trying to remember exactly the first moment that I became aware of his practice, because I feel like I've always kind of known about Thomas Phifer and Partners work. But I don't know, maybe it was that project, the Steel Case project in Grand Rapids. That was from like 1998. That was coincided with a time whenever I was in Michigan. Maybe it was the Taganic House in New York, also around the same time. All I know is that I saw those projects and I started following his work and the practice. And we're so fortunate that he's going to be talking about a couple of his most recent projects, the Glenstone Museum and then the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw. But, so over the years, what I've seen in his work, and for those of you who are familiar with his practice, attention to material, attention to light, attention to detail. I mean, really just thinking about the quality of our architectural, the spatial language that amplifies our experience of being in that space at that moment. And you see that consistently through all of his work. There's a very clear, critical, and conceptual intent that ties the full body of Tom's work together. So Thomas Phifer and Partners are known for their refined compositions. They're known for this. They're known for their masterful use of natural light. They're known for their thoughtful integration into the landscape. They consider the role of architecture as a platform that fosters meaningful interactions, and that is one that is shaped by light, by material, and then by experience. If you haven't spent time looking at the work of Thomas Phifer, I strongly encourage you all to go to his website, click on the link that brings you to the models, particularly the students of architecture, and it's amazing. It's inspiring to see these magnificent models, and it'll inspire you to want to build such models. I mean, these are big models on that page. So Tom is an internationally recognized leader. Since 1997, Thomas Phifer and Partners has been recognized with more than 30 awards, honor awards from the American Institute of Architects. Tom himself is the recipient of the Rome Prize in architecture from the American Academy in Rome, the Medal of Honor and the President's Award from the New York chapter of the AIA, the Arts and Letters Award in Architecture, and the National Design Award in Architectural Design from the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. And if that's not enough, in 2022, he was elected as a lifetime member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Parallel with his practice, Tom has also had a continuous commitment to education. He has held appointments at Columbia, at Cooper Union, at UPenn, at Yale, at USC, among others. And we are thrilled that Tom's appointment as a 2025 Portman Critic will add Georgia Tech to this list. So now, please join me with a very warm welcome to Tom Phifer.
We good to go?
Yep.
Wow. Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here. A little overwhelmed here. And I want to thank Julie for the invitation to come down and do this next semester. It's going to be really great fun for me. And I'm looking forward to coming back to the South. I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina, and used to come to Atlanta all the time. So this is really like a homecoming for me. And also want to thank the Portman family in particular for making this possible. What a remarkable legacy. I was just saying, one of the first times that I was at Sea Island, Georgia, I was walking down the beach and turned around and looked at this house that I absolutely couldn't believe, this masterpiece of a house, and of course learned that it was John Portman. So that was quite a wonderful moment for me. So anyway, so I brought these three projects here, really two projects in one, because these are the ones that changed my life. You know, I didn't get these commissions until I was a little older, and they had a remarkable impact on my life and my work. And so I wanted to bring these, to talk about these in some detail. First, the Glenstone Museum in Potomac, Maryland, about half an hour outside of Washington, D.C. And I start here with an image that we had pinned up forever. This is Ed Reinhardt, and you can imagine his work. He makes these 3-foot square black paintings, and with a lot of them, you have to sit there for a long time before you see possibly a cross in the picture. It's either a different texture, slightly different shade of black. And if you go back and read what his intention is, he talks about this being an immersive experience. He wants you to slow down, to get lost in the work. And that idea that he had about this immersive, slow experience, we tried to understand how to employ these gestures in the work, guided by this kind of slow experience, not only in the architecture, but in the landscape. And all in service, kind of a little like him, all in service of this experience with the works themselves. This happened to be a competition. This was on our first trip down to Glenstone. And one of my studio folks went and just put this square in color here, and it began to speak to us about getting immersed in nature. And of course, nature is not just grass and trees, but it's light. It is the movement of light, the changing light, and making the connection with nature a supreme part of the experience here. And of course, one sees this in a Japanese temple where you sit for hours and you watch the movement of the light and your body adjusts, your eyes adjust, and you begin to mark the passage of time. And so before we knew anything about the program or anything about what we wanted to make here, we began just to make these very simple images. And we made a lot of them. We must have made 40, 50 of these, where we framed the landscape and tried to intensify that physical experience of the relationship of the architecture to the land and to the light. And so then we began to understand the program. They released the program. The program was unique. There are 12 rooms here, but 10 of them are in perpetuity, where there's one artist, usually one work in that room, and those will be there for a long, long, long time. So with those, we worked with each individual artist. If there were a couple of cases where those artists were no longer living, but we worked with those to determine the proportion of the space, the character of the light, the intensity of the light, and the experience of arriving in that room. And then the other two are changing galleries. The one that is there, the kind of long rectangle that's down to the bottom right there, that is a changing room where they change it up every year for a different exhibition. And so when we started looking at each one of these individual buildings, they each turned out to have very different proportions, very different characters of light. And what we wanted to try to do was to connect the art to the landscape and also to the light and to the architecture. And so then we started with this idea of arrival, where you come from your half-an-hour journey from Washington in the car, you come and park in a bosque of trees, you arrive to that little rectangle that's there, that's in white, up there on the upper left-hand screen, upper left-hand part of the screen, and that is the arrivals building, where you come and you arrive, and then you walk. You leave that building and you walk through the landscape. You walk through the field. You walk through the light. And my hope is that as you walk through, the worries of the day begin to drop away. And you begin to get immersed in this preparatory experience to experience the art. That moving through the landscape and the light prepares you. And so as you move around this grove of trees, you begin to see the pavilions. These pavilions then are built on a peninsula of land, and this is where barns were. We wanted actually to build where others had built. So we built on this peninsula of land, and we pulled away the books, which are in the arrivals building. We pulled away the cafe, so that in fact, it's this immersive experience in the art. And so here, this was a study model that we made for a long, long time, where we kept allowing these buildings to move around a little bit, but this is the peninsula. The peninsula is going from top to bottom of your screen, and it shows how these buildings are nestled into the landscape. So when you think about how these buildings then sit in the land as these individual buildings with one work inside, it connects those back to this place and back to the work itself. And here is a slightly different angle of that. You can see you can see the way the land is moving around. We obviously had to tear up the peninsula in order to build the architecture, but we surveyed that and we put it back precisely the way it was. And so here are the plans. And so you arrive on the left-hand side, you arrive on the path and you come into the building there. That's the first one right adjacent to the path. And you then go down into the peninsula. You go down into the earth and you arrive at this lower level. And from there, you have a passage that walks all the way around. And from there, you have access to these rooms, this house of rooms. And so every room you come into from the passage, and then you come back out from that experience, and you can sit on a bench. And you then look at the pool, the planted pool that's there. And then you have time and distance to make it to the next room. So that as you pull these rooms apart from one another, it gives you this preparatory moment between each room to prepare yourself for the next work. And so this was another image we had pinned up for a long time. This is Riongis, where you can see that they have blocked out the immediate view of the land, but they have the sky and the light. It opens to the sky and the light and begins to be this place of some silence. And so once you come from each one of these rooms, this is the view that you get of the pool of water. It's a planted pool, and you begin to have this meditative moment after you've been in a room and you come back out. And so then we began to make these kind of charcoal drawings. Of course, they're done on the computer. I say they're charcoal because I grew up with those amazing images that came out of I.M. Pei's office that were actually charcoal. So I tried to get these folks in our office to try to duplicate that. So we made a lot of these images. And you'll see a little bit later that of course we were concerned a little bit with the composition of these elements as they began to sit softly in the land and they were separated. But they were in fact guided by light, which I'll talk about in a second. That building there, that's to the bottom right, is the pause, I call it the pause room, where you come and you're able to sit on a bench and have the landscape framed. And so we made one of these for every side. These are the final ones, but we made a lot of these as study images to begin to study how these were being lightly placed in the landscape. But that wasn't our first idea. Our first idea was to actually take these rooms and push them into the landscape, but not to change the land as it moved through. So you can see the image on the right, you're immersed in the landscape, you're in the land. And then you come and you're in a room with light. And in the beginning, we just took this cubic Renaissance room. We put a hole in the ceiling and we have light in that room. And then when the landscape dropped off, the image on the left is a place where the landscape would drop off and you'd have this relationship there with this passage. And so we developed this for quite some time where the land just moved through the project. We still had these rooms that were softly placed, but you were immersing yourself in the land and then beginning to come out of it. But we finally ended up with this pool of water that was one level below the earth. So you were submersed in the earth there. and then you have this experience with the sky and with the light. We cribbed the design of this pool from Carlo Scarpa's cemetery that he designed outside of Venice. You can see these kind of ribs in the water, and those trays that span between those ribs are actually removable trays that you can take out different plants, plant new ones, plant more seasonal plants. And every one of these areas there are different because they are completely designed to respond to the way the light is moving in the pool. This was a collaboration with Pete Walker, the great landscape architect from California. And so when you arrive in this kind of wooden timber room. It has no art, has a little bookstore, and you get checked in here. And then you walk through the landscape, and slowly you begin to see these rooms as they begin to emerge from the land in their own unique proportion. And then you arrive to this first entrance here. You kind of sneak in, and it is a place where you check in again. There's this remarkable work on the wall with Lawrence Weiner that greets you, and then you're guided by light. You come through the image on the left, then you turn, and then you go down. And of course, I had to put this in. This is another image I've got pinned up. We weren't quite as severe as this. This is Michael Heiser in the desert a long time ago, maybe back in the 60s, 70s, where he took a backhoe and he dug out these two big trenches. And he went below the datum of the earth, where you feel the platform of the earth and getting engaged with that datum and moving below the land and occupying the land. And so then in our project, you then go down and you continue to follow the light. The skylight is there. And one of the big debates that we had with our remarkable patrons here was about the handrail. The handrail was the last thing that was installed, and we made it wood so that it would begin to awaken the sense of touching something that was soft. We did the same thing with the door handles, so that everything that you touched began to awaken that sense of touch. And so then at the bottom, you then have this frame view of the pool. Your first view of the pool is this frame view. It's about 8 feet tall and about 25 feet long, this pane of glass. And you can see the stair and the light that the stair produces there. And then you are in the passage. This is Ronnie Horn's remarkable work that occupies a part of the passage. And Ronnie Horn's work, I'm going to refer to it a little bit later, but how her work, these glass works, are remarkable because they embody light. I've never seen anything like this that holds the light. This light is embedded in these forms, and the way that they engage with daylight is just remarkable to me. And so, you know, it maybe looked like from some of those kind of charcoal-like drawings that we were just moving these buildings, these little rooms back and forth in the landscape, trying to find the right composition. But in fact, we were moving them back and forth because we wanted this experience, as you move around the passage, to be guided by light. So you turn off all of the electric light, and you let the light guide you. So you go from light to shade, to shadow, to deep shadow, to darkness. This is one place, I'm sorry there are people in here, But there's some places here where you're always moving from this place of shadow. You turn to the right and go into this cubic room, and then you're immersed in this light, and you come out. And most all of the rooms have a big thickened wall so that you continue to slowly get drawn in to these rooms that are lit. So you still begin to experience this shade before you go back into the light. And then the one on the left is the entrance into Bryce Martin's room. And that's a room where you begin to experience this deep shadow where you come in. And you come in parallel to the room. You can see the little bit of shade that's coming there where you enter. You turn to the left and you're in. And so each one of these rooms then, we slid them back and forth to make this journey a journey through light. So that every day, every passing month, every season, you could come back. And if you came back in the afternoon, a lot of people come here for the day. That light experience in the rooms themselves and in this passage would change. And here's that same room. You can see this deep portal. Lorna Simpson's remarkable work here is the only work in this 24-foot cubic room that's lit with an oculus. And then you come to this pause room. This room, after you've come through half of the room, 6, 7 or so, and you've had that experience, you come into this room with a frame view of the landscape. And, you know, maybe one of the most remarkable projects, certainly ever, but certainly in America, is the Farnsworth House. And what you learn from the Farnsworth House is that Nice, he framed this horizontal landscape. And when you frame this, you intensify that experience. You heighten that experience. You awaken that sense of your connection between the light, the land, and the architecture as this catalyst. And so here is that room with this remarkable bench by Martin Puryear here. And so you sit here and you then sit there for a while and you begin to prepare yourself very slowly for the rest of the rooms. And these are some of the sections. This one happens to be Bryce Martin's room. This is Bryce Martin. You can see these two big clear stories that are there. Bryce wanted an enormous amount of light in his room, enough that when the museum is closed, we have to pull the shades down so it doesn't damage the work. We're very careful about conservation, but he wanted a lot of light in this room. And then this is this cubic room that's here. And this particular one is a changing room here. Carrie James Marshall's amazing work with this concrete oculus that brings light. This is Charles Ray with these are also clear stories. We worked with Charles on this room, and there's a window at the end with a frame view of the landscape. We also wanted to try to eliminate distractions here. So all of the supply air comes through that little tiny 1-inch slot at the top, and the return air comes in that little tiny 1-inch slot down at the bottom, so that there are not many, or try to limit it to no distractions in this room, so that the art is present. Robert Gober, his room, and then there's one outdoor room where you go back out. This is Michael Heiser's remarkable work. We worked with him on the height of his walls, the proportion of his space. He wanted this rotational moment here in his work, selected this gravel to respect the work that he had done in the desert. And you're able to go out. I was a little nervous putting my seal on the drawings when I saw people walking around this. They tell me it's safe. You've got to go with a guide, but hope that all works out. and then a building that we just completed. It's a building with Richard Serra's work that is a remote building. It's kind of out in the woods. You've got to travel 10, 15 minutes on foot to get to it. And it just has these 4 rounds in it, 4 rounds of equal weight. And then this is on Carrara, one of my favorite rooms. We worked with him a lot on the proportion of his room. He wanted something really tall, and he wanted the oculus to be even taller so that the light would have a long way to come down on his work. And he walked in the first meeting, and he had this paper that he had written about putting petrified charcoal in the floor and putting white marble behind the plaster. And he wanted a wood floor because he didn't think that, I don't know what one would call it, the atmosphere from these 2 materials would come together and it would change the way that you experience his work. And I got to say, after I read it, every time I walk in there, you got to believe. So this room is very particular for this work. It has these 3 date paintings in from Japan. He had to make a painting in a day or he would destroy it. These are the biggest ones he made. He was most excited for the moon landing. Can you imagine these 3 pictures on the 3 walls? And so these meant a lot to him, being an immigrant. And so then the journey began about what we wanted to make the building out of. Took us a long time to try to understand this, and we finally ended up with this image on the left. The work of Carl Andre, and the way Carl Andre took something from the lumberyard, he cut it precisely, and he stacked it precisely. And he made something ordinary into something extraordinary. And so we wanted to take and try to make this out of concrete. This block that was 6 feet long, about the height of a person, 1 foot high, 1 foot deep. And as we started to make these mock-ups, we made the mock-ups over different seasons. And what we learned, I think in the back of our brains, we knew this, but not so readily, that when you pour a block in the wintertime, it's a darker block. It takes a long time for that block to hydrate, if ever fully hydrate. And then if you pour a block in the summertime, that block is lighter because it hydrates quicker. And if you're lucky enough to have a block that's stripped after a rain or during a rain, and you have that streaking, then that is on the block for a long, long, long time. We wanted these to be a kind of tapestry that responded to this place, the temperature and humidity every day as they change. And if you go to the project now, if you go to the museum, the blocks on the southern side are all a little bit lighter. The ones on the north are still a little bit darker. And so it is kind of this living material that is going to change over time. Kind of trying to express the true nature of the material. We tried to eliminate these admixtures and these additives that would give it this certain sameness, but to try to get back to the true nature of this material, something that was heavy and lasting and permanent. And so, while we were working on Glenstone, we were hugely fortunate enough to receive these commissions to do these buildings in Warsaw. I'd never been to Warsaw before. I went there for the interview and stayed for a week. There is this remarkable renaissance that's going on there. You know, they have been silenced as a people. They've been silenced for so many decades. And these two buildings have a chance to be this voice. And so to participate in this Renaissance, how they gave this commission to an American to figure out is, I just consider myself blessed. And so here is something that was, these were very near and dear to me. In 1947, the late Harry Cobb, the architect, a dear, dear friend of mine, was on a fellowship from Harvard, and he came to Warsaw. He was going to continue on to Scandinavia, but he stopped in Warsaw, and he took these pictures. This was, and while I was there beginning to work on the project, this may have been, I don't know, 2016, 2017, something like that. Harry came down to my office, and he showed me this little book that he had made, and I had no idea. So we sat there and we talked for a long time about his experience. And so while I was there, they invited Harry to have a show of all of his photographs in the museum, in the country's museum. It took over 2 huge galleries, and people flocked to see this. The galleries were packed. Harry had taken these pictures in color, and no one had ever, these folks from Warsaw had never seen their city destroyed like this in color because there was no Kodachrome film. And so Harry brought these color images to them. And so in 1956, Stalin built this Palace of Culture as a gift to the Polish people. You can see that this is just completely leveled. And you can see the subway is beginning to get built, right? This is actually our site right here, right over the subway that's built. And since then, they have become a part of the EU. They've become a part of post-war construction. So they have a lot of apartment buildings, office buildings. They have begun to rebuild their culture and rebuild their city. You can see this is a picture that's taken from the palace that shows where they have soccer celebrations. So this is this is the center of the city. And so our site is right in front of the palace, this master plan. The story of how it got here is a remarkable story about a protest and about putting these 2 buildings in an important place. And so when I arrived, this was the master plan of putting these 2 buildings in. The museum is the rectangle to the right. The theater is the building to the left. And they sit. And here are the plans of these buildings that I'll go through in just a moment. Museum on the right, theater on the left, and then the sections through these 2 buildings. We had to keep these 2 buildings precisely the height of the lower part of the palace. They had to have arcades. They had to have a particular plan configuration. So we were in this very particular master plan. But you can see the challenge here are these 2 subway lines that are running right underneath our site. And so we started then to search for an architecture for each institution that might express their unique ethos. What was it about the theater And we saw it as this place of shadow and light. I'd gone to a lot of performances there with this theater company, a lot, and they all seemed to be very much about light and shade and shadow, and hence the light, the actors, the audience as participants, the sets, they all become more present all of a sudden. They are more present because of this light and shade and shadow of their enclosure, their surroundings. And I just had to slip this one in like the Michael Heiser. This is one of my favorite works that Richard Serra did. He took this paper, painted it, and stapled it to the wall, which is a remarkable thing. And it just speaks to me about this mystery, this kind of immersive space that I have no idea how deep that is. You just continue to feel the darkness against the light and the shade and the shadow. You can see how even in this photograph, the light is different from the corner to the edges. And so we began to start looking at this building, not just as a building that had this particular enclosure, but how we could take this light, shade, and shadow and move it all the way through the architecture. So this is the lobby, or call it the, where they're impromptu and planned performances. You can sit on the risers here. You can gather around. It's right off the forum in between each one of the buildings. So that this is the first space that you come to. This is the black box with an enormous window framed view of the park there on the north side of the site. And there's another big window, if they care to open it, that opens to their living room of the forum between the two buildings. And then this is the big hall. This is the place that's the size of an aircraft hangar, that's flexible, where you can change the seating, change the sets. It's completely a flexible theater. Acoustically, you can drop sets, you can drop the grid down, so that this is a changing landscape. And so to do that, we wanted to make this a room that participated in the life of the city, a space that belonged to the folks here. And also to put this room, to put this big room beside the palace, this big room that's open and welcoming, has a voice that will not be silenced. To put that next to Stalin's palace was important to all of us as we began to make this. And you know, our client here, the director of the theater, wanted you to be able to walk through this room from the central square all the way through to the park and watch the sets being made. And you could sit on some steps over there and watch the makeup being applied. He wanted this to be a part of the pulse of the city. And he wanted these impromptu moments to happen where you open the doors and there happens to be a dance going on. We have darkness. That fits, boy, right on cue. Oh. Oh, well. Somebody leaned on the switch. There. They'll be back down. That's fine. We're happy. That was a good break. So that so that this can be a living room in the city, a room that participates in the life of the city, to such an extent that they talked about having book fairs in here, so that on Saturdays you can roam through, and to make a room that's open and accessible and welcoming. And so when it came to making the building, we wanted it to stand against the metaphoric and physical presence of the palace, and to stand up against the commercial, this kind of glass architecture across the street. We wanted to make a heavy architecture, an architecture that was permanent, that spoke to the permanence of these institutions. And so the theater has these steel columns. All of the steel comes from the northern coast of Poland near Gdansk, where these plates are thick and the columns are solid, and it has this presence of kind of heavy and the weight of steel. And then we had this image pinned up for a long time. This is one of my favorite works by Louise Nevelson that I think is about ordering shadow and shade and darkness. This image was hugely important to us as we began to make this building, and we made that first moment there where the actors and the audience and the sets are more present, moving into shade, shadow, and darkness. And this was the precedent that we found. And it is kind of a treasury of shadows. It inspires mystery. And, you know, as Kahn always said, shade and shadow are always a part of the light. They're not different. They are a part of the light. And he also said that every space, when it was a dark space, it needed to have just enough light to know how dark it really was. Think about that for a while. Pretty good. And so then we were able, with this arcade, we were able to make these big double facades where there's an arcade you can look all the way up through. And then we decided to take all of the different programs. You know, with the theater, there are changing rooms and all sorts of different spaces. There's back of house, and they each have different program requirements. Usually one would try to organize this and maybe put a more normalized facade around it. But here we wanted each individual room to speak with through this special framed view and kind of describe what the space was. So each one of these has a very particular space behind it. You can see the one down to the lower left. You can see into it. That's the rehearsal hall. And so each one makes this kind of treasury of these openings that change. They get very dark when the sun's not there. Then they have their own light, shade, and shadow as the shadows begin to come in. So they change all day long. And so the building is a living building every day, depending on the character of the light. That middle long band is a long band, and that's where the offices are. And this is the one that's up there on the top that has the rehearsal halls in it. And so this kind of uniform grid is is a way to unify the expression there. And this is the facade that faces the palace, something that is more simple to hold up against that classical stone building with all of its history. My goodness, all of its history, that it sits there with its blankness and with its opening there. You turn the corner and those big doors are around the corner that open to the city. And that's how it looks from that side. It's exactly the height of the palace on the other side. The mayor looked at my slide there. He thought it was interesting, but can we have a few trees? He didn't like my severity there. I think we'll have some trees. And so then from the museum, you begin to see these frame views of the theater from across what we call the forum, this kind of living room between these two institutions that speak to one another, that will operate together. It is their living room that makes connections from the park to the main square, from the subway to the palace, everywhere. The space used for performances, for art, and become the living room. So here are these two buildings as they sit next to one another. And then just these model shots that we built in our office, just to study each one of the facades as they began to relate to the museum back and forth. You can see the big doors there to the right-hand side of the model. The big black boxes, that other larger opening there to the left. You can see the arcade at the bottom. And that little sliver of a window there are these private rooms where the actors can spend the night, little cells. And then from the main square side, the big lobby window there for the black box is there to the right-hand side, with the rehearsal hall there on the top floor to the right, and smaller back-of-house spaces are in the middle. And then as these two buildings sit there next to one another. And now to the museum, which is the first building that is actually, we have the first opening. Started working on the project in 2014. It's 2024. We're opening in October. So it's been an amazing process here. And so here is the forum between the two buildings as we get these beautiful extended honey locust trees there. And so the museum has this continuous arcade around it with a continuous glass wall. And it opens itself up to the city. And on the ground floor, we get to the lower right-hand side there, we get this place called what I call the reaction gallery. This quick reaction gallery. They'll give an artist a month to come up with his voice wants to be, what this current voice is, and he will install that room. And that is right against the boulevard, and people can come in back and forth, big doors that open up into that space. And then on the other side is this auditorium that has a big oculus above it. And that auditorium will be there for lectures and performances. You can come in right off the main square and see and look. And there's a main stair that's right in the middle. You can see it in the middle of the plan there. There's an education space with those four walls. A cafe is at the top and the bookstore is to the upper left. So this entire floor is a forum. And so here's the section of the museum on the ground floor. You can see that it opens all the way through. That tall space in the middle is over the auditorium. That space then reaches up for the light about 23 meters. And you will see the pool of light that comes all the way down and honors that auditorium space. On the other side of that big wall there is the quick reaction gallery. And so the two floors then for art are both 7.5 meters. The light is through clear story windows on the +1 level, on the +2 level. All of those galleries are lit continuously with daylight, so that as the sun is moving around these clear story windows, in the morning, you get a particular atmosphere of light that's stronger. And then the ones on the west have soft light. As the sun begins to move around, they equalize themselves, because the building is just about on the cardinal points. And then in the afternoon, the gallery on the west becomes brighter and the one on the east becomes a much softer light. And here was one of the interesting discoveries that we made, or I don't think we really discovered this, but we wanted to employ it. You can see those blue lines there. That's where the subways are built. They're active subways. And there were very, very few drawings of these subways. So there had to be an excavation down to these to try to discover how to support the museum. Big exercise. This is one of just to get up to the ground floor took almost 2 years. And so what they discovered is that for some reason, I'm not exactly sure why, this was the rhythm of columns and beams that could be employed below to span over the subway. These enormous concrete trusses there that are completely buried. They're completely buried below the earth. And so this enabled the museum to be built across this platform. But when we saw this, and we began to think about concrete as a building material, we began to think about how to understand how the building was made. This became important, because this is a bit of archaeology. And so the structure above and the beams are expressed in the architecture. The columns are expressed, so that in a sense, the archaeology, this below ground, begins to come and emerge and make the architecture itself, and forms the body of the architecture from this discovery about how it is below grade. And so just a couple of model shots that we have, you can see these big beams are a reflection of those beams that are down below grade. And all of these actually hold up the building. And so this grid comes up, so you know, it's not completely evident to folks that are walking through the building for the first time, but there is this, certainly the folks that know, I enjoy walking through because I understand where it all comes from. And of course, on the top, and here's sorry to keep referring to Khan, but you know, in the way at the very top of the building, the light is framed by the structure. Those two things are married together. They come together. And so one of the first things we started doing was making these little collages here in the very beginning. And we clearly saw the context here, the palace and the commercial, and we wanted an architecture that would hold its own against these works. We also wanted something that would elevate its presence in the city, to elevate its presence in the city, not only metaphorically, but physically. And so here's where these buildings sit, right in the middle of the city, right adjacent to the palace, and particularly the museum, with its wideness, is present and honored through that unique purity. And so as with the theater, with its light, shade, and shadow, and the performers and the sets, we wanted the museum to be about light and about how the work itself can be more present. And we wanted to use light as the principal building material here, the light that defines Warsaw. You know, it's really dark in the wintertime. It's like going to Berlin. If you've ever been to Berlin, dark and foggy. And so the light is very dim there. In the summertime, it's really bright and everything in between. So to arrive to the top floor and to have these works honored in these tall spaces, 7.5 meters, and be honored with the light of Warsaw, we thought was hugely important. You could see Monica's piece here to the left, a Polish artist. This is a Mies building that was crushed. She'll have to tell you why. But we wanted, and her work for the opening show is going to be hung in this big room, this big room here, and it goes back to Ronnie Horn, where this work of architecture, we wanted to try to make it a vitrine of light, just like Ronnie Horn's work, to hold and embody the light. Every time you walk in a museum and light is coming from one direction, it seems like it's coming from every direction, because it just embodies the light. This was hugely important to us. And so then we landed on this white concrete, and we had this remarkable contractor here who self-performed the concrete. This sense of permanence, the heaviness, the weight again, the honesty of the material as it began to sit there in the middle of Warsaw. And so here on the ground floor, again, open floor, a living room. It's a home for discourse, dialogue. And so then when the auditorium is finished, you will be able to come in and out. There are performances here. The Oculus goes all the way up. And then here it is, about 2 or 3 months ago. You can see the Oculus as it's bringing light down. This is going to be a wood floor with wood benches. And you can come here and sit. We have this beautiful custom designed chair that an artist made. And you can sit here, and this will be a place for dialogue in the city. And so then, you know, I've always noticed how you move through museums. You know, particularly vertical museums. How do you get from one floor to the next? In so many places, you have to get into an elevator. And what we thought we would make is a space in the middle that would be a social space. That would be, and I love this quote from Thelma Golden. This space, let the museum be a place to encounter art, but also to encounter each other. And we made this kind of double stair that you can go up and down and see your friends back and forth. And it's a monumental space. Those columns are 1 meter square. So it's a heavy space, and it has a big skylight above it that lights. And so from this place, you can then go into all 4 suites of rooms. So people always start here and they end up in this place. And when you look up, you see this double stairs. It moves around, and then you get a view of the sky in the middle. And you can again see the structure of the building as it begins to come through. And so this, this is a pretty particular thing, because at Glenstone, we had this house of rooms because they wanted very particular rooms for these artists. We worked with them. They became very particular. But the director and the curators in Warsaw didn't want a flexible building. You know, so many places, so many museums now are flexible. You can change it according to the exhibition. They didn't want that. They wanted defined rooms with four corners so that the rooms would curate the art. That was awfully brave of them to think that, and so every room is a different size. We worked for a long time to curate the size of all of these rooms, but the rooms are going to curate these particular collections in the permanent collection as they begin to get hung. And you can see the stair that's right in the middle. And so this is like the little game you played as a kid in the back seat. We took and we tried to find this pattern of rooms because we had to stay within this rectangle. This rectangle was a zoning. And so then once we settle with the curators on the size of these rooms, and I think about the same time that we were getting Glenstone finally detailed, we wanted to try to incorporate these kind of pause rooms of a different material, where you could reconnect in here with the city so that you never lose track of where you are in relationship to the place that you live. And so with each suite, and you can see the main stair, you can see the two quadrants on this side, you come through big rooms, smaller rooms, and then you come to these blue tinted rooms right here, and those linear ones on the top and on the bottom, we call those city rooms. And there's a bench, there's a library table, there are books, and you get a framed view of the city. Those other two rooms are rooms that are more in the middle, and they actually have a big window with art that you can look out, one to the boulevard to the east, the other one to the Forum to the west. And so on the +1 level, this is the clear story light as it comes in, very soft light, scale of the space, the structure. And then one of those rooms I was just speaking about where slightly lower ceiling, and you get this work in relationship to the boulevard across the street and with works of art. And then these city rooms, this is a rendering from a long time ago of coming into these rooms. This is local Polish ash that we've made the rooms out of. And you can see kind of the scale. This is a construction image from probably a year ago, but I love this picture showing the real scale of this opening. As you arrive in this place, after a few rooms, you can sit here and become a part of the sky and the light and the place that you live. And here is one of these thinner rooms. You can see the ash that's there. And so then on the top floor, we also have these city rooms, top and bottom, and then a terrace that's right in the middle. And you can see that big gallery that I'm going to show you. The one is on the upper left. That's the curators and the director wanted one room that was overscaled so that they could put monumental works in there. And in a sense, when you finally arrive here in the light of Warsaw, to these heroic rooms. And what I should have said is, yes, there are some darker galleries. They wanted rooms. And so just to go back to the plan on the left, that entire northern quadrant right there, those rooms are much lower. They have concrete ceilings, and they are rooms for more petite works. They're rooms that require darkness. And so here is that big room on the top floor. They want to have performances here. They want to make it a place for big works. And here is that room that we're all looking at there. And so I'll just click through a few construction pictures here. The building is not actually this white. The chief photographer for the museum loves to open the lens up. She really cracks the lens wide open and loves these. She's doing a book. Loves these kind of over burnished views of these. So they're not this white. You can see the structure coming through. Here they're just putting the radiant floor in. Here I tell you, I show these. This is probably from 6 or 8 months ago, but this is why I love being an architect, because I just love to build. I love to watch the act of construction. It is just completely mesmerizing to me. And here's one of those spaces where there will be a work of art at the end of this as you begin to turn the corner back into the light. And there is a part of this big picture was taken just a few days ago. This is the building as it sits there in Warsaw. You can see the concrete formwork. You know, I had this amazing moment when they were pouring the concrete, and the concrete was remarkable. There was one person, Rafa, and Rafa and I were in the tent. Rafa was a master craftsman in the tent where they were building the forms. And these folks with kind of my age, and they were sitting there building these forms with great care. Never seen anything like works of cabinet. They came in every day. They built these forms and they set them precisely, and people that poured them in. I was walking out amazed, and I was talking to Rafa as we were walking back to the site trailer, and he put his arm around me. I always remember this, and he turned to me and said, you know, these folks are build this building as a matter of pride. And this is a matter of pride that we're building this. And that was all he needed to say. Because that is the epitome of craft. That craft has meaning when it's this matter of pride, and particularly with these folks building something like this in their city was certainly an amazing experience for me to witness. There it is with the scaffolding. This is the cinema tower where you actually go down to the cinema, but it's the tallest room. There's the cinema tower room where you're walking down the stair and you look up, and that's it. And there's the cinema. It's black, it's underground. It seats about 150 people. And here are just some of the construction pictures. This will be the cafe. There's the stair. And there's the terrace overlooking the city. And there is that amazing concrete, Rafa. I used to lose my nerve, but I got my nerve up a few times towards the end of the project. I would walk into the trailer and give Rafa a hug. Because I had just never seen anything like this before, and he was the one. Thank you. What do you want to do?
Well, we're looking at this now.
Does it still work?
It still works.
Okay.
You can talking and responding to questions. And if you want to refer to any slides, it's just
Okay.
here without your notes.
Sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
Tom, that was great. I realizing that so my family and I were trying to plan what our summer trip is going to be. I think we're going to go to Warsaw. So let's see it. I think we have time for a few questions from the audience. Yes.
Hi, Tom. Thank you for that lecture. That was amazing. I have a question about one of your first comments when you said that these projects changed your life or your career. That reminded me of a quote from Kahn, of course, when he was talking about. So I read this in his monograph. He was talking about completing the Trenton bathhouse. And he said from that moment on, he never had to look to another architect for inspiration. And I'm wondering if you could just say a few more words about the moment in your career or life about these projects.
Well, that's I think I got this. I think it could have been Kahn, but I think I got it from the little film that Nathaniel Kahn made about his father. And he was interviewing I.M. Pei. And he was talking about Kahn being very difficult to work with, but that when Kahn found a patron, he found a patron for life. And that really dawned on me because I had never, before 2009 or 10, I'd never really had a client that felt that way, that felt like that. I mean, they were all amazing people, but they didn't touch me like that. And lo and behold, Mitch and Emily Rails arrived in the world, and they changed everything for me because of their belief. Not that they accepted everything I did, far from it, but just the relationship of us three working together. They were transformative. And then the same thing happened. So this was 5 years later. Then I went to Warsaw, and understanding that place and the situation and the history and my remarkable clients, that experience turned into something that was life-altering too. So thank goodness.
Amazing.
Since you have like worked in different countries, how is the like process of designing and building different than like the United States? Like how is that process different across the world?
The United States is tough. It's tough to build here. It's hard. Craftsmanship is not what it should be. Usually go for solutions that are thinner, there has been this kind of lost craft. They don't make, but maybe with wood now, maybe there is a fresh start where one can begin to build beautifully crafted wood rooms, because we're building something in Maine in wood, and there are craftsmen there that understand that material and are building it with great precision. And as I go around the country, that could be the material that, because we haven't built with wood so much here. The Swiss, the Austrians, all those European countries have mastered the craftsmanship of wood. But it's just harder. I mean, and the process is harder here in America, and it has an impact on not only the quality of the architecture, but how the ideas begin to develop as well. It's a little bit harder,
I want to thank you for celebrating light the way you do. It's awesome.
Mhm.
But just two questions. Do you have fun doing architecture? And what is your favorite fun space?
Wow, that's a good one. Um, I don't know. I love our little living room in New York. Jeannie and I have been there since 1990. And I love that space because it's a space of comfort. And she and I, because our boys have moved away, getting older, that space is a space of great joy. And because of its scale, probably also because Jeannie's there. But I would have to say that.
Tom,
Hi.
hi. This is really something else, and I would encourage all the students to take a look at your website. I mean, the word that comes to mind probably is sublime, but I know you were in New York as a young person. You grew up in the South, you just said, and I often would encourage students to think about spending time in New York after graduation. I haven't been there in a long time, and I wonder if you could say something about the impact New York had on you as a young designer. And would you still recommend that as an idea for a young person to move to New York?
Well, just to answer the question, the last part of the question, now is a remarkable time to live in New York, particularly if you're in your 20s. I mean, there is just so much activity and energy, and it is just a place that I can feel the people in my office who just love it there. And now when I moved there in 1980, 81, New York was down on its heels. I had never been to New York before. I don't want to make this story too long, but I think it goes back to mentorship. So maybe I'll just launch into this for 1 minute. I had lived in the South, never been to New York before, ever. Wanted to move to New York. And so I wrote these letters, and I wrote, I don't know, 10 letters or so to people that I knew of. Todd Williams and Billy Shin were the only people that answered me back. Only people. And I got the letter, and they wanted me to come to New York. So I hopped on a plane, was dropped off in Times Square, didn't know where that was, and I hoofed it up to Carnegie Tower on 57th Street. Went up to see Todd and Billy, and Todd and Billy sat there with me. It felt like an eternity, but I think it was 90 minutes, hour and a half. They sat with me and talked to me and moved through my work, and halfway through, I was thinking, what in the world are they looking at? But they were just it's just, and so at the end, Todd turned to me and he said, Billy and I are here alone. We don't have any work. And so my heart dropped. But let me call my good friend Charlie Guathamy downstairs, and I'm sure he'd like to see. He picked up the phone, called Charlie. I went downstairs, and Charlie hired me on the spot. I borrowed $300 and moved to New York. And so there's a story about mentorship, because Todd and Billy have been, I've been close to them forever now. And the way that they are so generous has been hugely impactful for the way that I lead my life. And it shows you how that is handed from one to the next. And New York at that time was kind of dangerous. And weren't as many people on the streets, kind of tough. The park was in bad shape. So I've seen it get better and better and better. It's never looked better. It's a remarkable place. I encourage everybody to come and live there, even if just for a year or two. to have that experience when you're young. It's a great place.
What a great story about Todd and Billy and just the generosity. It's fantastic. Um, thank you again, Tom, for a really tremendous lecture. We look forward to having you with us here in the spring.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.